Picture this your entire life, from the crops you plant to the festivals you celebrate, dictated not by the sun or the seasons, but by a calendar designed to serve an empire's ambition. Time, the one constant we all share, was once a weapon wielded by kings and priests in a silent war that shaped civilizations. This is the untold story of the Lost Calendar Wars, a clash of competing time systems that divided cultures, toppled rulers, and left scars still visible in our modern world. These weren't just disagreements over dates, they were battles for control over human destiny itself. Think about how deeply time governs us even today: birthdays, holidays, tax deadlines. Now imagine living in an ancient world where your calendar could mark you as an outsider, a heretic, or even an enemy of the state. From the Maya's celestial calculations to Rome's political timekeeping, entire societies rose and fell based on whose calendar held sway. The stakes were unimaginable. Get the timing wrong and crops fail, armies march unprepared, and gods go unappeased. This was more than a scholarly debate. It was a fight for survival, identity, and power. So why does a conflict fought with sundials and star charts matter now? Because every time you check your phone or scribble a date, you're inheriting the fallout of these ancient battles. Our modern calendar is a patchwork of compromises stitched together by emperors and popes, each erasing rival systems to cement their own legacy. But hidden beneath its familiar surface are echoes of forgotten wars, dates that once sparked rebellions, solstices that decided kings. This is the shadow history of time itself, and by the end of our journey, you'll never look at a calendar the same way again. The question isn't just how we measure time, but who gets to decide, and what they gain by making us all live by their clock. The first civilizations didn't just observe time, they wove it into the very fabric of their existence. Take the ancient Egyptians, whose lives revolved around the Nile's predictable floods. When the river swelled each year, it left behind fertile soil, turning barren land into fields of abundance. Their calendar wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline divided into 3 seasons: flood, planting, and harvest, each dictated by the heavens. But here's where things get fascinating. The Egyptians noticed something peculiar. Their 365-day solar calendar slowly drifted out of sync with the actual flooding. Over decades, the dates no longer matched nature's rhythm. Imagine the panic when festivals meant to honor the gods fell during the wrong season. This wasn't just an administrative headache, it threatened their entire relationship with the divine. Meanwhile, far to the east, the Babylonians took a different approach. Their calendar pulsed to the rhythm of the moon, with months beginning at the first crescent sighting. This lunar system shaped everything from temple rituals to tax collection, but it had its own flaws. 12 lunar months add up to only 354 days, leaving their calendar nearly 2 weeks shorter than the solar year. To keep festivals from wandering through the seasons, Babylonian priests would occasionally insert an extra month, a practice so politically charged that only the king could authorize it. One misstep and crops might be sown too early or armies mobilized too late. The stakes, nothing less than the survival of their civilization. These early calendars reveal a truth we often forget. Timekeeping was never neutral. Whoever controlled the calendar held power over sowing and reaping, worship and warfare, life and death. And as empires expanded, clashes over time grew inevitable. When Rome absorbed Egypt, their mismatched calendars created chaos: farmers following the Nile's schedule, while bureaucrats demanded taxes by Roman dates. The Maya, with their astonishingly precise long count calendar, viewed time as a cosmic force to be appeased, where misaligned rituals could invite disaster. These weren't mere differences in calculation. They were collisions of worldviews. Each civilization convinced their way of marking time was the only path to order and prosperity. The stage was set for a conflict that would echo through millennia, a war not of swords but of seconds, seasons, and celestial alignments. For the ancient Egyptians, the Nile wasn't just a river, it was the heartbeat of their civilization, and their calendar was its pulse. Picture standing on the banks as the floodwaters began to rise, not just as a natural event, but as the moment the gods reset the clock. Their solar calendar, one of humanity's first attempts to pin down time with precision, was a marvel of practicality. 12 months of exactly 30 days, plus those 5 mysterious days tacked on at the end, days so outside normal time they were considered both sacred and dangerous. But here's what made this system revolutionary. It wasn't just about counting days, it was about survival. When the Nile flooded, it didn't just water crops, it delivered the fertile black soil that made the desert bloom. Miss the flood's timing and famine followed. That's why the Egyptians became obsessive sky watchers. They noticed that the star Sirius, which they called Sopdet, would disappear for 70 days before reappearing just before the floodwaters rose. This celestial event became their New Year's alarm clock, a divine signal etched into their calendar. But even their ingenious system had a flaw. Those 5 extra days weren't quite enough to keep perfect sync with the solar year. Over centuries, the calendar crept out of alignment, causing New Year's festivals to arrive in the wrong season. Imagine the terror when rituals meant to summon the flood were performed months early, with no rising waters to prove the gods listened. This wasn't just an accounting error, it was a theological crisis. The pharaoh's entire legitimacy rested on maintaining Maat, the sacred order of the universe. If the calendar failed, it meant chaos was winning. So they tinkered, debated, but never added leap years like we do today. Why? Because their calendar wasn't just a tool, it was a covenant between earth and heaven. When Julius Caesar later borrowed their solar framework for his Julian calendar, he added that crucial leap day, solving the drift. But for the Egyptians, perfection wasn't the goal. Their calendar was a living thing, as unpredictable and life-giving as the Nile itself. Meanwhile, their lunar calendar, used for religious festivals, created a quiet tension. Priests needed moon phases to time rituals, while farmers relied on the solar calendar's predictability. This dual system forced Egyptians to navigate 2 parallel timelines, one tied to the cosmos, the other to the earth. It's a reminder that even in antiquity, time was never simple. It was a negotiation, a compromise between human needs and the unfathomable rhythms of the universe. The legacy of their struggle: every time you glance at a modern calendar, you're seeing the ghost of the Nile's floods, still marking time millennia after the last pharaoh ruled. While the Egyptians looked to the sun and stars, the Babylonians found their rhythm in the silver glow of the moon. Their calendar pulsed with lunar cycles, each month beginning with the first sighting of the crescent, a moment so sacred that teams of temple astronomers would scan the evening sky, knowing a single day's miscalculation could throw the entire kingdom into disarray. Picture the tension in those watchful nights. If clouds obscured the moon, priests had to decide whether to declare a new month or wait another day, their choice rippling through markets, religious festivals, and even the timing of royal decrees. This wasn't just timekeeping, it was a high-stakes dialogue with the divine. Every month in Babylonia belonged to a different god, with rituals so precise that offering bread baked on the wrong phase could anger the deities. The 7th month, Tishritu, was ruled by Shamash, the sun god, and marked the autumnal equinox, a time when kings would undergo symbolic humiliation to renew their divine mandate. But here's where things grew complex. 12 lunar months only add up to 354 days, leaving their calendar drifting 11 days shorter than the solar year. Without correction, festivals meant for spring harvests would eventually bleed into winter, so the Babylonians devised a radical solution: an occasional 13th month, inserted by royal decree when the seasons slipped too far out of alignment. This intercalary month was more than a mathematical fix. It was a political lightning rod. Only the king could authorize its addition, meaning control of the calendar was control of the cosmos itself. A ruler might delay the extra month to extend tax collections or hasten it to ensure military campaigns aligned with favorable omens. Astrologers scoured the heavens for signs a lunar eclipse could postpone a coronation, while Jupiter's position might dictate when to plant crops. The consequences of misreading these celestial signals were dire. Historical records tell of kings who lost thrones after failed harvests blamed on calendar errors, their reigns deemed out of sync with the gods' will. When Babylonian timekeeping spread across Mesopotamia, it carried more than dates. It imposed an entire worldview. Conquered cities had to adopt the imperial calendar or risk divine wrath, their local festivals absorbed into the Babylonian cycle. But this lunar system collided violently with solar-based rivals. Persian satraps demanding taxes on fixed solar dates clashed with farmers following the moon's rhythm. Merchants trading between empires juggled conflicting schedules, their contracts voided by mismatched months. Even the stars seemed to take sides. Babylonian astrologers dismissed Egypt's Sirius-based New Year as heresy, while Greek astronomers mocked lunar calculations as primitive. Yet for all its complexity, the Babylonian system left an indelible mark. Their 7-day week, tied to planetary gods, still structures our lives. Their zodiac, born from lunar mansions, shapes horoscopes millennia later. And their greatest innovation, viewing time as a language of the gods, transformed calendars from mere tools into living maps of human destiny. Every time you glance at the moon and instinctively sense its phases, you're channeling the ancient stargazers of Mesopotamia, for whom time was never just counted, it was decoded, one celestial omen at a time. High in the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya built a vision of time so vast it makes our modern calendars seem like child's scribbles. While other cultures tracked seasons or lunar phases, the Maya mapped eternity itself, their long count calendar stretching across thousands of years in precise, interlocking cycles. Imagine a civilization so obsessed with time that they calculated the length of a solar year to within minutes of modern astronomy, all without telescopes or computers. Their calendar wasn't just a tool, it was a cosmic clockwork where every tick measured the destiny of gods and humans alike. At the heart of this system were the Bacton's units of 144,000 days each, like chapters in a celestial history book. The Maya believed each Bacton carried its own energy, shaping the rise and fall of kingdoms. When the 13th Bacton ended in 2012, the world held its breath, mistaking this milestone for a prophesied apocalypse. But the Maya weren't predicting doom. They were marking the reset of a grand cycle, much like our New Year's Eve. The real tragedy: we almost lost this profound wisdom forever when Spanish invaders declared their Gregorian calendar the only true measure of time. The conquest wasn't just a clash of swords, it was a war against memory itself. Franciscan monks burned Mayan codices, branding their calendars as pagan heresy. Indigenous scribes were forced to recast sacred dates into Christian feast days, their long count erased like a forbidden language. Yet fragments survived, hidden in oral traditions and surviving texts like the Dresden Codex, where Venus tables still track the planet's movements with jaw-dropping accuracy. These weren't primitive superstitions, they were the pinnacle of pre-Columbian science, a testament to how deeply the Maya understood time's architecture. What made their system extraordinary was its layered complexity. Alongside the Long Count's epic scale, the Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar, guided rituals and agriculture, while the Hob tracked the solar year. Together, they formed a harmonious rhythm like gears in a celestial machine. A Maya priest could tell you that planting corn on one day might bring bounty, while another invited drought, not magic, but meticulous observation passed down through generations. When colonial authorities imposed the Gregorian calendar, they didn't just replace dates, they severed a civilization from its ancestral clock, leaving farmers to sow seeds by unfamiliar stars. The irony: today, scientists marvel at Mayan astronomy, while modern planners adopt their concept of deep time to address climate change. Their calendar wars never truly ended. Every time someone jokes about 2012's failed apocalypse, they're dismissing a system far richer than pop culture caricatures. The Maya didn't fear time's end. They revered its cycles, teaching us that calendars aren't just about counting days, but about finding our place in the universe's endless dance. The early Roman calendar was less a precise timekeeping tool and more a political plaything, its lunar month so wildly out of sync with the seasons that harvest festivals sometimes landed in winter. Imagine politicians literally stealing days. Pontiffs, the high priests of Rome, could shorten or lengthen months to keep allies in office or rush enemies out. A consul's term might mysteriously gain weeks during a crisis, while tax collectors found their deadlines extended when wealthy patrons needed more time. This wasn't just disorganization, it was systemic manipulation, turning time itself into a currency of corruption. Entered Julius Caesar, fresh from conquering Egypt, where he'd marveled at the precision of their solar calendar. The Nile's predictable floods had honed Egyptian astronomy to razor sharpness, and Caesar recognized the same stability could cement Roman power. With the help of Alexandrian scholar Sosigenes, he unleashed the Julian reform in 45 BCE, 365 days divided into 12 months, with a leap day every 4 years to correct the drift. But Romans didn't embrace this new order willingly. The year of transition, aptly called the Year of Confusion, stretched to 445 days to realign the seasons, leaving farmers and priests alike fuming as festivals and markets collapsed into chaos. Why such resistance? Because the old calendar was woven into Rome's identity. Religious rites demanded specific lunar phases. The kalends, nuns, and ides marked sacred divisions of the month. Caesar's solar system didn't just change dates, it upended an entire cosmology. Traditionalists warned that ignoring the moon's rhythms would anger the gods, while provincial governors struggled to enforce new tax schedules. Even the leap day sparked suspicion. Some saw it as a numerical trick, an unnatural insertion into time's sacred flow. Yet the Julian calendar's true power lay in its universality. For the first time, Rome's sprawling empire ran on a single clock, synchronizing everything from military campaigns to grain shipments. No longer could local officials exploit lunar vagueness. Dates became fixed, deadlines enforceable. This wasn't just scientific progress, it was bureaucratic genius, binding diverse cultures to Roman rule through shared time. The irony: those same leap years Caesar introduced would eventually drift too, accumulating 11 minutes annually until Pope Gregory had to fix them 12 centuries later. But the lesson endured. Whoever controls the calendar doesn't just measure time, they define reality itself. The clash between lunar tradition and solar order reveals a pattern we've seen again and again. From Babylon to Rome, calendar reforms were never neutral. They were acts of conquest as decisive as any battlefield victory. When Caesar reset Rome's clocks, he wasn't just correcting math, He was declaring that time, like empire, belonged to those bold enough to reshape it. By the late 16th century, Europe was living a double life, one measured by the sun, the other by an increasingly unreliable calendar. The Julian system, perfected by Caesar over 1500 years earlier, had accumulated a 10-day error, throwing saints' feast days into the wrong seasons and making Easter calculations a nightmare for clerics. Spring equinoxes now fell on March 11th instead of the traditional 21st, meaning the Church's holiest celebration sometimes occurred before nature itself signaled rebirth. For Pope Gregory XIII, this wasn't just an astronomical inconvenience, it was a crisis threatening the very unity of Christendom. His solution, crafted by a team of Jesuit mathematicians and astronomers, was as bold as it was controversial. On October 4, 1582, the Catholic world went to bed and woke up on October 15th. 10 days simply vanished, erased by papal decree to realign the calendar with the cosmos. But this surgical precision sparked outrage beyond Rome's borders. Protestant reformers saw the Gregorian correction as a Trojan horse, a sneaky attempt to reassert papal authority under the guise of scientific progress. German pamphlets warned of Roman time thieves, while Anglican bishops accused the Pope of tampering with God's ordained chronology. The resistance wasn't merely theological, it was deeply practical. Farmers in Lutheran Denmark found their almanacs suddenly useless, their planting schedules mismatched with Catholic neighbors' markets. Merchants in Amsterdam faced contract disputes when shipments arrived on wrong dates according to business partners in Spain. Even astronomers were divided. Tycho Brahe, Denmark's famed stargazer, refused to adopt the new system, insisting celestial observations proved the equinox hadn't drifted as far as Rome claimed. For decades, travelers crossing Europe had to carry conversion tables like currency exchange rates, mentally adding or subtracting days depending on whether they entered Catholic or Protestant territory. England held out until 1752, by which time the discrepancy had grown to 11 days. When Parliament finally adopted the Gregorian calendar, riots erupted across the countryside. Crowds demanded their lost time back, convinced landlords were cheating them out of rent. The phrase, "Give us our 11 days," became a protest cry, immortalized in political cartoons mocking the reform. Meanwhile, Orthodox Christian nations resisted even longer. Russia didn't switch until after the Bolshevik Revolution, causing the famous October Revolution to actually occur in November by Western reckoning. What made this calendar war so explosive wasn't just the math. It was the realization that time, the one constant everyone assumed was impartial, could be weaponized. Protestant scholars like Johannes Kepler found themselves torn. They acknowledged the Julian drift as scientific fact, but feared endorsing a papal solution would legitimize Rome's interference in sovereign affairs. The Gregorian reform's eventual triumph wasn't due to divine mandate but cold economics. As global trade expanded, the cost of maintaining parallel time systems became unbearable. Yet traces of the conflict linger. Modern historians still footnote dual dates for early modern events, a silent testament to an era when even the days on a calendar could divide nations. China's imperial astronomers didn't just track time, they orchestrated it, balancing the sun's steady march with the moon's ever-changing face in a celestial dance perfected over millennia. Unlike the rigid solar calendars of Rome or the purely lunar systems of Babylon, the Chinese calendar achieved something extraordinary: harmony. Picture a farmer in the Yangtze Valley, planting rice not by guesswork, but by precise lunar phases adjusted with occasional extra months to keep festivals aligned with the seasons. This wasn't just timekeeping, it was a philosophy etched into the heavens. where every intercalary month served as a cosmic correction, a nod to the universe's subtle imperfections. At the heart of this system lay the 24 solar terms, each marking 15 degrees of the sun's path with poetic names like Great Cold or Grain Rain. These weren't arbitrary labels, they were survival tools. When the term awakening of insects arrived, farmers knew to prepare for spring plowing. Clear and bright signaled the start of tomb-sweeping rituals. But here's the genius: the solar terms anchored the calendar to agriculture, while lunar phases governed cultural life. A mid-autumn festival under the full moon might shift by weeks on a Gregorian calendar, but in China, it always coincided with the harvest's peak brilliance. Dynasties rose and fell by their mastery of this balance. Emperors maintained entire bureaus of astronomers whose predictions could make or break their mandate from heaven. Get the calendar wrong, and droughts or floods might be interpreted as divine displeasure. When the Mongol Yuan dynasty introduced Islamic astronomical methods, it wasn't just scientific progress, it was a power play, proving their mastery over both earth and sky. The Ming rebellion that followed partly justified itself by accusing the Yuan of corrupting traditional timekeeping. Even the name of the calendar changed with regimes: the temporal calendar under the Tang, the Great Concordance calendar under the Ming, each tweak a silent proclamation of dynastic legitimacy. Then came the 19th century, and with it, European traders demanding contracts dated in the Gregorian system. At first, the Qing dynasty permitted dual-dating Chinese years for domestic affairs, Western dates for foreign trade. But after the Opium Wars, the Gregorian calendar became a weapon of humiliation, imposed by treaty ports and missionary schools. Traditional almanacs, once government-published necessities, were suddenly banned as superstitious relics. Farmers who'd relied on solar terms for generations now faced unfamiliar months named after Roman gods. The backlash was fierce. Secret societies circulated underground calendars, and rural rebellions timed their uprisings by forbidden lunar dates, turning time itself into resistance. What Western powers dismissed as backward lunar worship was actually a sophisticated lunisolar calculus, refined over 2,000 years. Modern science now confirms its precision. The Chinese system's average year length misses the true solar year by mere seconds, rivaling the Gregorian calendar's accuracy. Those primitive intercalary months, they're mathematically equivalent to our leap days, just distributed differently. Today, China officially uses the Gregorian calendar, but the traditional system still pulses beneath the surface, guiding festivals from Lunar New Year to the Dragon Boat Festival. When families reunite on dates that wander across January or February, they're not just keeping tradition, they're honoring an ancient vision of time as a living bridge between human rhythms and the cosmos' grand design. While most ancient civilizations eventually blended lunar and solar cycles, the Islamic Hijri calendar stands apart, a defiantly lunar system untouched by the sun's rhythms. Picture a calendar where Ramadan, the month of fasting, migrates through the seasons, arriving 11 days earlier each solar year. A festival celebrated in winter's chill might, decades later, fall under summer's scorching sun. This isn't a flaw, it's the entire point. For Muslims, time isn't bound to harvests or solstices but to the moon's eternal cycle, a sacred rhythm set in motion during the Prophet's migration from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE, the event that marks year zero in the Hijri count. The brilliance of this system lies in its resistance to co-option. Unlike agricultural calendars tied to earthly power, the Hijri calendar answers only to the night sky. Each month begins not by calculation but by the actual sighting of the crescent moon, a practice that once required messengers racing across deserts to confirm sightings. and today still sparks lively debates between astronomers and traditionalists. But when European colonizers arrived with their Gregorian calendars, they didn't just impose new dates, they attacked a pillar of identity. British administrators in India declared solar dates mandatory for legal contracts, while French officials in Algeria dismissed lunar months as primitive. To communities marking time by the Hijri system, these weren't bureaucratic updates, they were acts of erasure, severing the link between daily life and divine order. Yet the calendar endured, often underground. Indonesian farmers whispered lunar dates to schedule plantings despite Dutch-enforced almanacs. Moroccan scholars hid moon phase calculations in prayer books. This wasn't mere nostalgia. The Hijri calendar structured everything from inheritance laws to marriage contracts, its months carrying theological weight. Shaban, the 8th month, is for spiritual preparation, Dhul-Hijjah, the 12th, for pilgrimage. Colonial solar calendars couldn't replicate this sacred cadence, reducing time to mere economics. Today, the tug-of-war continues. Global business runs on Gregorian dates, forcing Muslim-majority nations to juggle dual systems. Saudi Arabia uses astronomical calculations to standardize Ramadan start, while communities in Pakistan still rely on moon sightings, sometimes splitting the Ummah across adjacent days. Critics call this impractical, but supporters argue the very unpredictability is a lesson in submission, a reminder that humans don't control time, they flow with it. Every time a Muslim pauses to ask, "Is it Ramadan yet?" they're participating in an ancient resistance, affirming that some rhythms are too sacred to sync with empire. In the heart of Hindu tradition, time doesn't just pass, it dances. The Panchangam, India's ancient calendrical system, is more than a schedule. It's a symphony of celestial movements where the moon's phases, the sun's path, and the positions of planets like Jupiter and Saturn converge to dictate everything from the timing of a child's first haircut to the most auspicious moment for a king's coronation. Imagine a farmer in Kerala consulting not just the season but the nakshatra, the lunar mansion, to plant rice, or a bride in Varanasi waiting for the precise alignment of Venus and Mercury before tying the sacred thread. This isn't superstition, it's a sophisticated science of synchronization where human life mirrors the cosmos. What sets the Panchangam apart is its refusal to prioritize solar or lunar cycles alone. While Western calendars eventually chose the sun as their anchor, Hindu timekeepers embraced duality. Days begin at sunrise, months follow the moon, and years track the sun's return. A delicate balancing act maintained by adding extra months, much like a musician adjusting tempo to keep harmony. The result, a calendar where festivals like Diwali shimmer under autumn, stars one year and winter skies the next, yet always arrive when the cosmic conditions are just right. When British colonizers imposed the Gregorian calendar in the 19th century, they weren't just changing dates, they were attacking a pillar of Dharma. Officials dismissed the Panchangam as backward, replacing its intricate calculations with rigid solar months. But the backlash was swift. Priests continued to publish clandestine almanacs, and villagers defiantly celebrated Makar Sankranti or Pongal by the sun's entry into Capricorn, not the arbitrary January 14th. The resistance wasn't just about tradition, it was about truth. The Panchangam's intercalary months, called Adhik Maas, corrected seasonal drift naturally, while the British system felt like a foreign imposition, divorcing time from its spiritual roots. Today, the Panchangam thrives in the digital age, with apps delivering daily planetary positions to millions of smartphones. Yet its deeper lesson endures. Time isn't just measured, it's experienced. When a devotee observes Ekadashi fasting days, shifting with the moon's waxing and waning, or when an entire city pauses during Rahu Kalam, an inauspicious planetary window. They're participating in a millennia-old conversation between Earth and sky. The British may have left, but their calendar never fully conquered India's cosmic clock, proving that some rhythms are too profound to replace. Buried beneath Mexico City's bustling streets for centuries, the Aztec calendar stone wasn't just a timekeeping device, it was a monument to the universe itself. Weighing over 24 tons and stretching nearly 12 feet across, this colossal basalt disk wasn't meant to track days but to encapsulate the Aztec vision of cosmic order. At its center glares the sun god Tonatiuh, his tongue outstretched like a sacrificial blade, surrounded by concentric rings mapping eras of creation and destruction. Each symbol wasn't merely decorative, it was a vital piece of a celestial engine where the wrong ritual or misaligned festival could literally stop time. The stone's dual nature reveals the Aztec genius for synthesis. Its outer ring depicts the 20-day signs of their sacred Tonopouhualli, a 260-day ritual calendar governing ceremonies and divination. But interlocking with these symbols was the Zu-Pouhualli, the 365-day solar cycle tied to agriculture. Together, they formed a 52-year calendar round, after which the Aztecs believed the world risked annihilation unless priests performed the new fire ceremony. Imagine the terror and awe as every half-century, all fires were extinguished, hearts were offered to the gods, and the fate of civilization hung on whether the stars would permit a new flame. When Cortez's soldiers toppled the stone in 1521, they weren't just destroying an artifact, they were dismantling an entire framework of existence. Spanish friars misinterpreted the disk as a devil's sundial, missing its true function as a theological compass. The conquest didn't just replace one calendar with another, it severed the Aztecs from their cosmic anchor. Farmers who once planted maize by the Zu-Pouhualli now struggled with unfamiliar Christian feast days, while priests versed in celestial mathematics were silenced. The stone's burial symbolized more than defeat. It was the erasure of a people's relationship with time itself. Yet the calendar stone had a final act of defiance. Rediscovered in 1790 during drainage work near the Zocalo, it resurfaced as Mexico was stirring toward independence. Suddenly, this relic of a suppressed civilization became a nationalist icon, its intricate carvings proving the sophistication of pre-Hispanic culture. Modern scholars now recognize its staggering precision. The Aztec solar year was just hours shorter than our modern calculation, their understanding of Venus's cycles rivaling European astronomy of the same era. What makes the stone story so poignant is its unfinished revolution. Though displayed today as a museum centerpiece, its original purpose remains partially obscured, its full ceremonial context lost to conquest. Every time a visitor traces its carved serpents or counts its day signs, they're touching not just stone but the ghost of a worldview that saw time as sacred, fragile, and drenched in divine meaning. The Spanish may have stopped this calendar from turning, but they couldn't erase its truth that time for the Aztecs was never just measured. It was lived, fought for, and ultimately died for. Crossing the Atlantic didn't magically synchronize colonial clocks. America's early years were a cacophony of competing calendars, where farmers planted by one system, merchants traded by another, and courts struggled to enforce laws across contradictory dates. Picture a Virginia tobacco farmer in 1680, consulting an almanac that stubbornly clung to the old Julian calendar, while his London-bound shipment was logged in Gregorian dates. A contract signed on March 25th might be honored or voided depending on which calendar the judge recognized, a legal twilight zone where 11 days could vanish with the stroke of a pen. The chaos peaked in courtrooms. In one notorious case, a Pennsylvania widow nearly lost her inheritance because her husband's will was dated February 29th, a day that didn't exist that year in the Julian system still used by rural scribes. Lawyers dueled not just with precedents but with astronomical tables, arguing whether the Gregorian reform applied in colonies that had no official stance. Meanwhile, Puritan New Englanders rejected popish Gregorian dates entirely, celebrating holidays like Christmas on what they called the true old-style Julian calendar, December 25th for Catholics, but January 5th for the devout. Almanacs became battlegrounds. Printers like Boston's Nathaniel Ames produced hybrid calendars showing both systems side by side, their pages riddled with annotations like O.S. for old style and N.S. for new. Farmers needed these guides to navigate a world where tax deadlines and market days shifted like sand. One almanac even included a conversion table titled "A Remedy for the Discontented," humorously advising readers to subtract 11 days from their lives if they felt cheated by the calendar reform. Beneath the practical headaches lay a deeper tension: timekeeping as identity. German settlers in Pennsylvania kept their traditional farmer's calendar, which added an extra month every 19 years to stay aligned with seasons, a system that baffled English neighbors. Native American nations, observing lunar cycles tied to ecological events like salmon runs or buffalo migrations, found colonists' rigid solar dates as arbitrary as the Europeans found theirs. When the Continental Congress finally adopted the Gregorian calendar in 1752, it wasn't just about efficiency, it was a quiet declaration of cultural alignment with Enlightenment Europe, a choice that marginalized alternative timekeepers. The irony: even after standardization, fragments of the old chaos lingered. Rural, Old Christmas celebrations persisted into the 19th century, and farmers' almanacs still printed moon phases alongside civil dates. These calendar conflicts weren't just administrative glitches, they were skirmishes in America's first culture war, proving that whoever controls the clock doesn't just tell time. They define what time is worth. When the French revolutionaries stormed the Bastille in 1789, they weren't just overthrowing a king, they were declaring war on time itself. By 1793, the new republic had abolished Sundays, renamed the months, and reset the calendar to year one, as if history had only just begun. This wasn't mere administrative tinkering, it was an act of temporal revolution, an attempt to sever every link to the Christian past. The Gregorian calendar, with its saints' days and papal origins, was now a relic of the age of superstition. In its place came 12 sleek new months, each 30 days long, divided into 3 10-day decades that erased the 7-day week, and with it the Sabbath. The poetry of the new calendar was deliberate. Months were renamed after nature's rhythms: Brumaire for fog, Thermidor for heat, Floréal for flowers. Even time itself was decimalized. Days now had 10 hours, each hour 100 minutes, each minute 100 seconds. Clocks were manufactured to match, their faces a dizzying spiral of unfamiliar numbers. But beneath the rationalist veneer lay a darker purpose. By eliminating Sundays, the state struck at the heart of rural life, where church bells had marked time for centuries. Farmers who once measured seasons by saints' feast days now faced bureaucratic decrees labeling harvests vendemmiaria and planting seasons germinal. Resistance was swift and visceral. Peasants secretly kept track of forbidden Sundays, while underground priests celebrated Mass on rest days that no longer officially existed. The 10-day workweek proved disastrous. Workers, promised 1 day off in 10, collapsed under exhaustion. Even nature seemed to rebel. The fixed 30-day months failed to align with lunar cycles or agricultural needs, leaving vineyards and wheat fields out of sync. The calendar's architect, mathematician Gilbert Rham, had envisioned a tool of liberation. Instead, it became a symbol of revolutionary overreach, its rigidity mirroring the terror's worst excesses. Napoleon's abandonment of the revolutionary calendar in 1800 wasn't just pragmatic, it was an admission that time cannot be dictated by decree. Yet for 12 turbulent years, France had proven a radical truth. Calendars don't just mark time, they manufacture reality. Those poetic month names, Brumaire, Thermidor, live on not as practical tools but as warnings. They remind us that when regimes seek to control the future, the first casualty is often the past. The Soviet Union's grand experiment with time began not with a whisper, but with the relentless ticking of factory clocks. In 1929, as the first five-year plan demanded unprecedented industrial output, the Bolsheviks made a radical decision. Weekends were bourgeois inefficiency. Gone were the 7-day weeks, replaced by a continuous 5-day cycle where workers rotated days off, ensuring machines never stopped. On paper, it was a stroke of genius. Factories operated at full capacity, with 80% of workers laboring while 20% rested. But in practice, it unraveled the very fabric of daily life. Imagine a family where the father's rest day was Tuesday, the mother's Friday, and the children's Sunday, if they were lucky enough to coincide. The communal rhythms that had structured Russian life for centuries, church bells, market days, shared meals, shattered into a cacophony of mismatched schedules. This wasn't just a logistical nightmare, it was a psychological assault. Workers dubbed the system Neperivka, the uninterrupted week, but the name mocked its consequences. Without synchronized rest days, villages couldn't organize weddings, friends rarely met, and parents barely saw their children. The abolition of Sunday, that ancient pillar of rest, left a void no ideology could fill. Even nature rebelled. Cows, accustomed to being milked at consistent intervals, suffered when collective farm shifts fluctuated. The Soviet press praised the reform as a triumph over religious obscurantism, but factory managers secretly reported plummeting morale. Workers showed up exhausted, their bodies still wired for the 7-day rhythm embedded in human biology since Babylonian times. By 1931, the Kremlin admitted defeat not with fanfare, but with a quiet return to a 6-day week. The 5-day disaster was replaced by a slightly less chaotic 6-day cycle, where everyone rested on the 6th, 12th, 18th, and 24th of each month. But this too collapsed under its own absurdity. When Stalin finally reinstated the 7-day week in 1940, it wasn't framed as surrender to tradition, but as a victory of socialist realism. The party line claimed workers had outgrown the need for radical timekeeping, a face-saving lie. The real lesson was far simpler. You can decree a new calendar, but you cannot reprogram humanity's deepest rhythms. The Soviet experiment revealed a truth that echoes through all calendar wars. Timekeeping isn't just about efficiency, it's about belonging. When the Bolsheviks erased Sunday, they didn't just cancel a day off, they severed millions from shared moments that make life more than labor. The factories may have hummed uninterrupted, but the silence left in homes and villages spoke louder than any production quota. Today, as digital age demands blur work and leisure anew, the ghost of Neperivka lingers, a cautionary tale of what happens when we mistake the clock for the compass. Few conflicts reveal the power of calendars more starkly than the ancient battle over Easter, a holy day that became a holy war over time itself. In the 4th century, as Christianity spread across empires, church leaders faced an impossible question: how to fix the date of Christ's resurrection when Rome followed the solar Julian calendar and Jerusalem kept lunar Passover traditions. What began as a technical debate soon fractured along cultural lines. with Alexandria's astronomers championing complex lunar calculations while Rome insisted on simpler solar rules. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Get Easter wrong and you risked celebrating redemption while still fasting for Lent, or worse, dishonoring the resurrection with a misaligned feast. The schism deepened as politics intruded. When the Council of Nicaea in 325 attempted to standardize Easter, they didn't just vote on dates, they drew a line between East and West. Constantinople's clergy clung to the Jewish Passover as their anchor, seeing Rome's solar computations as a dangerous break from scriptural roots. Meanwhile, Latin bishops argued that distancing Easter from Passover was essential to assert Christianity's independence. Behind the theological rhetoric lay a raw power struggle, whose calendar would define Christendom's holiest day. The answer would determine which city, Rome or Constantinople, held ultimate authority over time itself. Centuries later, the Gregorian calendar reform tore these wounds open anew. When Catholic Europe jumped ahead by 10 days in 1582, Orthodox churches refused to follow, branding the change as papal overreach. Suddenly, Easter diverged spectacularly. In some years, Western Christians feasted on roast lamb while Eastern believers were still observing solemn Holy Week. The difference wasn't just liturgical, it became cultural. Russian peasants whispered that Catholics celebrated a false Easter, while Venetian merchants complained that Orthodox dates disrupted trade routes. Even nature seemed to take sides. In 1853, a freak blizzard froze Moscow's Orthodox Easter processions, while Rome basked in spring sunshine, a meteorological twist that fueled rival claims of divine favor. Today, the gap persists. Orthodox Easter often falls weeks later, not due to stubborn tradition, but because their Julian-derived calculations prioritize the astronomical full moon over Gregorian approximations. Modern astronomers could synchronize the dates with a keystroke, but the rift is no longer about math, it's about memory. For Greek and Slavic churches, keeping the old calendar is an act of continuity, a thread linking them to the apostolic past. Meanwhile, attempts at reconciliation revealed deeper tensions. When Finland's Orthodox minority switched to the Gregorian Easter in the 1920s, diaspora communities accused them of betrayal. Similar proposals in America today spark heated debates. Should unity override tradition, or does surrender on dates mean surrendering something far older, a sacred rhythm that has outlasted empires? The Easter conflict teaches us that calendars are more than algorithms, they're vessels of identity. When two Easters coexist in modern cities like Jerusalem or Chicago, it's not just a scheduling quirk. It's proof that time, the most universal of forces, remains deeply personal, a language we speak not just with clocks, but with our hearts. The ticking of our modern atomic clocks is so precise it can measure the gradual slowing of Earth's rotation, a reality that sends shudders through the digital age. Every few years, the International Earth Rotation and Reference System Service quietly announces a leap second, inserting an extra heartbeat into global timekeeping to keep our hyper-accurate atomic clocks in sync with the planet's ancient, imperfect wobble. It sounds like a minor technical tweak, but beneath the surface, this quiet adjustment is reigniting the oldest conflict in human history: who gets to define time itself? Tech giants have drawn battle lines over these microscopic pauses. Google, Amazon, and Meta argue that leap seconds introduce chaos into the flawless rhythm of digital systems. A single misplaced second can crash stock trades, disrupt GPS navigation, or scramble cloud servers. In 2012, Reddit's servers stumbled during a leap second event, triggering cascading errors. Linux operators joke about the leap second smear, where they gradually distribute the extra second across hours to avoid system crashes. For engineers building the infrastructure of our connected world, Earth's rotational quirks feel less like cosmic poetry and more like a glitch in the matrix. Yet astronomers and navigators warn that abandoning leap seconds would unravel something profound. Without them, atomic time would drift further from solar time by about 1 second every year and a half, a tiny gap at first, but over centuries, clocks would diverge from the sun's position by entire hours. Imagine a future where noon no longer means the sun is highest in the sky, where sundials become decorative relics rather than timekeepers. The rift wouldn't just inconvenience sailors and stargazers, it would sever humanity's last tangible link to the celestial rhythms that shaped our earliest calendars. The debate exposes a philosophical chasm. Silicon Valley views time as a utility, a standardized grid to optimize efficiency, where every nanosecond must be predictable. Traditionalists see it as a dialogue with the cosmos, where Earth's irregularities are features, not bugs. Ancient Babylonians would recognize this tension instantly. Their lunar calendar required similar messy corrections, their priests weighing celestial signs against societal need. Even the Gregorian reform, for all its precision, left Easter's date tied to lunar phases, acknowledging some harmonies shouldn't be broken. Now, the planet faces a potential time split. Some nations may keep leap seconds while others drop them, creating parallel timelines like the Gregorian-Julian divide of the Renaissance. Satellite networks might follow one standard, financial markets another. The irony is exquisite. In our quest for perfect synchronization, we risk fracturing time itself. The next chapter of this ancient war won't be fought with papal decrees or imperial edicts, but in server farms and international telecommunication meetings, proof that no matter how advanced our tools become, the human struggle to tame time remains as eternal as the stars. Before European ships appeared on their shores, the Cherokee people marked time by the Little Deer Moon and the Blackberry Moon, names that didn't just track months but told the story of their relationship with the land. Across the Pacific, Aboriginal Australians followed intricate seasonal calendars with names like Gurrung for hot, dry weather or Burak when the rains came, each phase tied to specific plants, animals, and ceremonies. These weren't primitive systems, they were ecological masterpieces, fine-tuned over millennia to harmonize human life with nature's pulse. Yet when colonizers arrived with their rigid Gregorian calendars, they dismissed these living almanacs as backward superstition, imposing dates that severed generations from ancestral wisdom. The violence of this erasure went far beyond paperwork. Mission schools punished native children for speaking of moon cycles, while Australian authorities banned traditional fire practices timed by indigenous seasons, leading to catastrophic wildfires when the land wasn't burned at its ecologically correct moment. In Canada, the Hayter's 13 moon calendar, which guided sustainable fishing and cedar harvesting, was replaced by commercial fishing quotas that ignored lunar spawning cycles. The result, collapsing salmon runs and cultural amnesia, as elders whispered that the young had forgotten how to listen to the time. But from the Amazon to the Arctic, a quiet revolution is unfolding. The Maori in New Zealand have revived Matariki, their new year marked by the Pleiades star clusters rising, now officially recognized as a national holiday. In Hawaii, traditional Mahina moon calendars guide modern taro farming, blending ancient lunar knowledge with organic agriculture. These aren't nostalgic reenactments, they're lifelines. When the Diné Navajo reintroduced their Diné Baikya calendar in schools, it wasn't just about naming months. It restored teachings about when to gather medicinal plants or hold coming-of-age ceremonies, stitching fractured communities back into nature's rhythm. The most powerful defiance comes from places where indigenous calendars never fully disappeared. In Bolivia, Aymara communities still celebrate Wilcacuti Andean New Year on June 21st, the winter solstice, with offerings to Pachamama, a date so significant that the government adopted it as an official holiday. The Quechua Watakuna agricultural calendar, with its 28-day lunar months, now appears alongside Gregorian dates in Peruvian almanacs, helping farmers adapt to climate change by reviving drought-resistant crops planted at precise celestial moments. What makes these revivals radical isn't their rejection of modern timekeeping, but their insistence that multiple calendars can coexist. A Yupik hunter in Alaska might check GPS for tide tables while also consulting his grandmother's knowledge of the Tengmayapak moon when seals are fattest. An Aboriginal artist in Arnhem Land paints Dawu seasonal calendars as living maps, showing how flowering plants signal the arrival of stingrays, knowledge that once guided trade routes. These calendars don't just tell time, they tell who a people are. The battle isn't over. Corporate land developers still dismiss indigenous timekeeping as irrelevant, while museums label stolen calendar sticks as artifacts rather than living systems. But every time a Lakota child learns that Chanakfopa, moon of popping trees, means it's time for winter stories, or a Maori elder plants Kumara by the Maramatoka lunar cycle, they're doing more than remembering the past. They're reclaiming the right to measure the future by rhythms older than clocks, a future where time isn't just counted, but deeply, sacredly lived. The dream of a perfectly rational calendar, one where months align neatly with quarters, where holidays never wander, and where the entire world shares the same dates without confusion, has haunted reformers for centuries. Enter the world calendar, a bold 20th century proposal that sought to wipe away the Gregorian system's quirks once and for all. Imagine a year with 12 identical months, each containing 28 days, 4 flawless weeks, plus an extra World's Day, floating outside the week to keep the solar year intact. No more February's awkward shortness, no more mismatched quarter lengths that baffle accountants. It was mathematics masquerading as timekeeping, a utopian vision where efficiency trumped tradition. Yet from the moment it was proposed in the 1930s, the world calendar faced a hurdle no equation could solve: humanity itself. Jewish and Seventh-day Adventist leaders protested that a fixed calendar would desecrate the Sabbath, as their holy days would cycle through the week over years. Orthodox Christians recoiled at the idea of Easter's date being untethered from lunar calculations. Even secular entities balked. Birthdays and anniversaries pinned to specific weekdays would suddenly shift, upending personal rituals. The backlash revealed an uncomfortable truth. People don't just use calendars, they live by them, weaving dates into the fabric of identity. The irony is delicious. After millennia of emperors and popes imposing calendars by decree, the modern era's most logical system was thwarted not by power, but by pluralism. The League of Nations, then later the United Nations, debated the world calendar with growing frustration, watching as science stumbled against sacred rhythms. Even small compromises like the rival Pax calendar, with its symmetrical months, failed to bridge the gap. Astronomers loved the precision, CEOs craved the predictability, but grandmothers setting Passover tables and farmers planting by monsoons shrugged. Time, it turns out, isn't just a grid to be optimized. It's a language, and nobody wanted to relearn how to speak their own lives. Today, the dream persists in digital form. Silicon Valley futurists propose programmable calendars where AI dynamically adjusts dates for optimal productivity, while globalists argue that climate change demands a unified ecological calendar. But history whispers a warning. The Mayan Long Count, the French Revolution's decimal time, even the Soviet 5-day week, all were attempts to rationalize time, and all collided with the messy reality of human culture. The ultimate paradox: the more we try to perfect timekeeping, the more we're reminded that time doesn't belong to clocks or committees. It belongs to the child counting sleeps until a birthday, the farmer watching monsoons, the imam scanning for the crescent moon. Our calendars aren't just tools, they're mirrors reflecting who we are, and no equation can ever capture that. Digital timekeeping promised to connect the world, but in binding us to the relentless precision of atomic clocks and smartphones, it may have severed something deeper: our innate connection to the rhythms that guided humanity for millennia. Consider the irony: we now share a single global instant, synchronized down to the nanosecond, yet we've never been more out of sync with the natural cues that once dictated our lives. The sun no longer determines when we rise, blue light screens do. The harvest moon doesn't signal festival preparations, calendar alerts do. This isn't just convenience, it's a quiet colonization of time, where Silicon Valley algorithms and Greenwich Mean Time have replaced the organic cadences of dawn, dusk, and season. History offers a chilling parallel. Just as Roman emperors imposed their solar calendar on lunar-worshipping provinces, and colonial powers forced Gregorian dates onto indigenous cultures, today's digital timekeeping is a top-down system designed for global markets, not human biology. Farmers who once planted by the wet moon now follow apps that ignore local rainfall. Office workers in Stockholm suffer the same artificial 9-to-5 cycle as those in Singapore, despite one city enduring winter darkness and the other basking in equatorial constancy. The result: a pandemic of temporal dissonance. Studies show rising sleep disorders, seasonal depression, and even fertility issues as our bodies rebel against the fiction that time is one size fits all. The most insidious shift isn't in hours or minutes, but in how we perceive time itself. Ancient cultures saw it as cyclical, a spiral of returning seasons and rituals. Industrialization turned it into a straight line, a resource to spend or waste. Now, digital time has flattened it into a perpetual present, where time zones collapse into Zoom calls scheduled across midnight and noon, and streaming platforms erase seasonal content rotations. The Maya tracked 26 celestial cycles. We track one, the unblinking pulse of the internet, indifferent to solstices or tides, yet resistance is growing. Chronobiologists champion circadian hygiene, urging schools to start later so teens' melatonin rhythms aren't overridden by arbitrary bell schedules. In Iceland, where midnight sun and polar night defy standard time, some businesses adopt flex time, letting employees work by light rather than clocks. Meanwhile, apps like Circa sync meetings to participants' local daylight, and Lunar reminds menstruating users to track cycles alongside moon phases, small rebellions against the tyranny of universal time. The lesson from antiquity is clear: when timekeeping serves power rather than people, the fallout is measured in more than minutes. The Babylonians feared calendar errors would anger the gods. We're learning they disrupt cortisol levels and crop yield. The challenge isn't abandoning digital precision, but remembering that time was never meant to be a grid. It's a conversation between earth and sky, body and season, tradition and progress. Our ancestors fought calendar wars to keep that dialogue alive. The question is, will we? The clash over calendars was never just about counting days. It was about whose story would frame the future. When the Spanish burned Mayan codices, they weren't merely destroying books. They were erasing a people's relationship with time itself, replacing their long count with a Christian chronology that made indigenous history seem to begin only at conquest. This pattern repeats like a tragic refrain. The Gregorian calendar's global spread didn't just standardize dates. It cemented the Vatican's authority over daily life. turning saints' feast days into universal milestones while local solstice celebrations faded into folklore. The French Revolution's short-lived calendar, with its months named after weather and harvests, wasn't just a rebranding exercise. It was an attempt to erase Christianity from collective memory, one renamed month at a time. Consider the quiet violence of a simple date change. When colonial administrators in India demanded tax payments according to the Gregorian calendar, farmers who had always planted and paid by lunar cycles faced ruin. Harvests didn't magically align with the new solar dates, yet penalties for late payments were enforced with brutal efficiency. In Ireland, the shift from the Julian to Gregorian calendar in 1752 didn't just skip 11 days, it severed communities from ancestral traditions tied to specific lunar phases, leaving elders to whisper that the government had stolen their time. These weren't administrative hiccups, they were acts of cultural amputation, severing people from the rhythms that had organized their lives for generations. The reverse also holds true. Calendar survival is cultural survival. The Jewish people's remarkable continuity across 2,000 years of diaspora owes much to their lunar calendar's resilience. Despite pressure from empires Rome, Christendom, the Soviet Union maintaining Hebrew dates for holidays like Passover became an act of defiance, a way to mark time on their own terms. Similarly, when Iran kept the Solar Hijri calendar after its revolution, it wasn't just rejecting the Gregorian system, it was asserting an unbroken link to pre-Islamic Zoroastrian timekeeping, weaving ancient Persian identity into modern statehood. Even today, calendars remain battlegrounds for recognition. Taiwan's official documents use the Republic of China calendar, counting years since 1912 to assert a distinct historical narrative from Beijing's. In Ethiopia, the persistence of the ancient Coptic calendar, 7.5 years behind the Gregorian, means citizens celebrate the new year in September, a living protest against European timekeeping's dominance. These aren't quaint traditions, they're statements that time, and therefore history, belongs to those who measure it. The most insidious legacy of calendar wars is how they shape what we consider normal. When business meetings default to Monday mornings and fiscal years start in January, we're unconsciously obeying decisions made by long-dead popes and emperors. The 7-day week, a Babylonian concept refined by Rome and spread through Christianity, feels so natural that alternatives like France's 10-day revolutionary week seem absurd. Yet for the Dogon people of Mali, whose 5-day market cycle structures social life, or the Balinese Pawukan calendar's 210-day ritual cycle, our system is equally arbitrary. The winners didn't just write history, they wired our brains to perceive time through their lens, making their victories invisible through sheer ubiquity. But cracks in the monolith are appearing. The resurgence of indigenous calendars, from the Maori Matariki holiday to Navajo moon phase farming, isn't nostalgia, it's reclamation. When a Maori parent teaches their child that the new year begins with Pleiades rising, not January 1st, they're doing more than sharing tradition. They're offering a radical proposition. That time isn't singular but plural, a tapestry of rhythms as diverse as humanity itself. The French revolutionaries failed to decimalize time, but their dream lives on in digital alternatives like Swatch Internet Time, where the day is divided into 1,000 beats. These experiments remind us that every calendar is a story, and stories can be rewritten. The deeper truth is this: control over time is the ultimate power, because it shapes how we remember, how we plan, and ultimately how we dream. When Emperor Augustus renamed months in his honor, or when Stalin abolished weekends to fuel industrialization, they understood that calendars don't just mark time, they manufacture reality. The battles may no longer be fought with papal bulls or royal decrees, but every time we debate daylight savings, leap seconds, or school start times, we're continuing the oldest war of all, the struggle to decide whose time counts. Time has always been the ultimate political chessboard where emperors didn't just move pieces, but rewrote the rules of the game itself. Take Julius Caesar's infamous calendar reform. On the surface, it was a noble correction to Rome's chaotic lunar system, but beneath the lofty rhetoric lay a dictator's masterstroke. By inserting 90 extra days into 45 BCE, stretching it to 445 days, Caesar didn't just realign the seasons, he extended his own consulship, buying time to consolidate power. The message was clear: control the calendar and you control the lifespan of regimes. This wasn't isolated to Rome. Centuries later, Pope Gregory XIII didn't just delete 10 days to fix astronomical drift. He erased them during a strategic lull between major Catholic feast days, minimizing backlash. The reform's timing was no accident. It landed in October after harvests but before winter, when economic disruption would be least noticeable. Even the choice of skipped days avoided saints' festivals, ensuring no sacred observances were lost. What seemed like clerical bookkeeping was actually a brilliant soft power play, tying global timekeeping to Vatican authority for centuries. Dictators learned from these playbooks. When Mussolini forced Italy onto fascist era, dating in 1926, resetting the year count to his march on Rome, he wasn't just commemorating history. He was erasing the pre-fascist past, making every contract, newspaper, and birth certificate declare loyalty with its very date. Similarly, North Korea's Judge calendar, which starts in 1912 with Kim Il-sung's birth, doesn't just honor the founder, it renders all prior Korean history numerically irrelevant. These regimes understood that calendars don't just track time, they manufacture eras, declaring some histories valid and others obsolete with a stroke of the pen. But the most insidious manipulations often targeted cultural memory. After the French Revolution, renaming months, replacing July with Thermidor or August with Fructidor, wasn't just administrative zeal. It was an attempt to sever ties with Catholic feast days and royalist associations, rebranding time itself as revolutionary property. When the Soviet Union abolished weekends in 1929, replacing them with staggered rest days, the goal wasn't efficiency. It was to break the rhythm of church attendance, atomizing communities that gathered every Sunday. These weren't reforms, they were temporal purges designed to make collective memory impossible. The wreckage of these battles lingers in plain sight. Walk through modern Istanbul, and you'll find Byzantine churches dated by the Julian calendar, Ottoman mosques marked with Hijri years, and secular buildings using Gregorian dates, layers of conquered time etched into stone. Or consider how Britain's tax year still begins on April 6th, a fossilized relic of the 11-day Gregorian shift in 1752, when the Treasury refused to lose revenue. Even our 7-day week, a Babylonian invention repackaged by Rome, carries the ghosts of astrological god Saturn's day, Sun's day, Moon's day masked under Christian rebranding. The lesson: every calendar is a palimpsest, with each ruler scraping away the past to inscribe their own version of now. What we accept as neutral January 1st, Monday mornings, fiscal quarters, are actually victory monuments in forgotten wars. The next time you jot down a date, remember, you're not just marking time, you're speaking the language of whoever won the last calendar war. When Rome's legions marched into Judea, they brought more than swords and siege engines, they carried an entire temporal regime. The Julian calendar, with its emperor named months and solar precision, wasn't just a tool, it was cultural artillery aimed at reshaping conquered minds. Yet in the shadow of the Colosseum, Jewish communities clung to their lunar reckoning like a state secret. Scrolls hidden in clay jars preserved the rules of intercalation, the careful addition of extra months to keep Passover aligned with spring barley harvests. Rabbis calculated new moons not by imperial decree, but by the testimony of witnesses who'd glimpsed the slender crescent. To mark time this way under Roman rule wasn't just tradition. It was treason by sundial, a quiet insistence that some rhythms transcend empire. The stakes were existential. When the temple fell in 70 CE and Jews scattered across continents, their calendar became portable homeland, a way to sustain identity without soil or sovereignty. Diaspora communities from Babylon to Iberia might debate Talmudic fine points, but all agreed on the sanctity of Tishray's new moon or Nisan's full moon heralding Passover. Even when Christian rulers later banned Hebrew timekeeping like 6th century Visigothic laws punishing Jews for celebrating holidays, out of sync with Easter, the lunar cycles endured in coded kitchen almanacs, where women tracked phases by the yeast of Sabbath bread. Ethiopia's defiance took a different shape. While Europe adopted the Gregorian calendar, this ancient Christian kingdom held fast to the Coptic system, keeping their new year in September and their dates 7 years behind the West. Tourists today marvel at the 13 months of sunshine, claim a reference to Ethiopia's 12 30-day months plus a short 5th season, but miss the deeper rebellion. When Mussolini invaded in 1935, his troops didn't just face rifles, they encountered an entire populace operating on temporal wavelengths they couldn't decipher. Ethiopian patriots coordinated resistance by traditional feast days, turning liturgical calendars into weapons of asymmetric timekeeping. Half a world away, the Mapuche people of Patagonia resisted both Spanish and Chilean rule by preserving their Tripantu, New Year at the winter solstice. Authorities dismissed it as pagan nonsense until aerial photos revealed something astonishing. Ancestral ceremonial sites aligned not with Gregorian dates, but with celestial events calculated by indigenous astronomy. The stones had kept time even when the people were forbidden to. What unites these struggles is their recognition that calendars are more than tools, they're living languages. When the Soviet Union outlawed Hebrew dates in the 1920s, Jews wrote them in disappearing ink on cigarette papers. When Australia banned Aboriginal seasonal knowledge, elders painted it as dot patterns disguised as art. Every act of preservation, from Ethiopian scribes hiding Coptic manuscripts in hollowed-out trees to Mayan priests smuggling codices under Catholic saints' names, shared one goal: to ensure that when empires eventually crumble, their people would still know when to plant, when to pray, and when to rise. The miracle isn't that these systems survived, it's how they transformed resistance into renaissance. Modern Hebrew's revival as a spoken language relied on liturgical calendars kept alive through exile. Ethiopia's unique time zone and calendar now fuel national pride, with digital apps bridging traditional and Gregorian dates. Even the smallest victories echo. When Chile finally recognized Tripantu as a national holiday in 2021, it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was proof that after 500 years, the Mapuche clock still ticks and empires, for all their power, are merely borrowing time. In the quiet corners of Kyoto, where cherry blossoms mark the turn of seasons just as they did 1,000 years ago, Japan's imperial calendar tells a story of remarkable adaptation. On the surface, the Gregorian dates govern business and bureaucracy, but beneath them pulses the old lunisolar system, its month still named for natural phenomena: Matsuki, for the month when friends gather, Satsuki, for the planting moon. This isn't just coexistence, it's a masterclass in temporal harmony. The Japanese New Year aligns with January 1st, yet the ancient zodiacal cycle still dictates fortune-telling and festival dates, creating a cultural double helix where tradition and modernity share the same clock. India takes syncretism even further, weaving threads of time into a living tapestry. Government offices run on the Gregorian calendar, Hindu priests consult the Vikram Samvat for religious dates, farmers track the Tamil solar months for planting, and Islamic communities follow the Hijri for Ramadan, all simultaneously. A single day might be Pongal in the south, Makar Sankranti in the north, and an ordinary Tuesday on office calendars. Far from causing chaos, this multiplicity reflects a profound truth. Time isn't monolithic, but layered, like the rings of an ancient tree. The genius lies in how these systems intersect. Diwali's fireworks might light up Gregorian October or November, but they always fall during the lunar month of Kartika, when the monsoon's retreat clears the skies for lamps to guide Lakshmi home. The most fascinating hybrids emerge where colonial timekeeping collided with indigenous wisdom. Ethiopia's unique calendar, 7 years behind the Gregorian, isn't just a relic, it's a strategic blend. While the world celebrates New Year's Eve in December, Ethiopians ring in Enkutatsh on September 11th, a date that aligns with the end of rains and the resurgence of yellow daisies across the highlands. Yet they seamlessly navigate global business by mentally toggling between systems, proving that cultural memory and practicality can coexist. These adaptations reveal a subtle rebellion against the myth that modernization requires cultural surrender. When the Meiji government imposed the Gregorian calendar in 1873, Japanese poets lamented the loss of lunar aesthetics until kabuki theaters cleverly staged leap month performances, preserving the old rhythms under new labels. In Bali, the Paukan calendar's 210-day cycle still dictates temple ceremonies, even as hotels book guests by Western dates. The Balinese don't see contradiction, they see completeness, like a dancer moving to 2 drum beats at once. The real magic happens at the edges where systems overlap. Mexico's Day of the Dead, timed to Catholic All Saints' Day yet bursting with Aztec symbolism, or China's Spring Festival that wanders between January and February but always heralds the first new moon. These aren't compromises but conversations across centuries. Even our 7-day week, borrowed from Babylon by way of Rome, now carries Hindu planetary names in Indonesia and Arabic weekday markets in Zanzibar, each culture imprinting its own meaning onto shared structures. This fluidity carries a lesson for our fractured digital age. Timekeeping at its best isn't about domination but dialogue. The Maya didn't vanish when their long count was suppressed. They folded its wisdom into Catholic feast days, hiding sacred time within saintly garb. Modern apps now revive these connections not as antiquarianism, but as a bridge between precision and meaning. When a Tokyo salaryman checks both Gregorian deadlines and traditional Rokuyo luck days for wedding plans, or a Mumbai chef time spice blends by both monsoon phases and freezer expiration dates, they're doing more than multitasking, they're keeping time's soul alive in an age of atomic clocks. The future of timekeeping may lie not in choosing one system, but in learning, like these cultures, to let multiple rhythms dance together. As humanity stands on the brink of interplanetary colonization, our ancient struggle to define time is entering uncharted territory. Picture a future where Martian colonists mark birthdays by the red planet's 687-day year while Earth-bound families video call across a growing time gap of 39-minute longer Martian days. NASA already wrestles with this dilemma. Their Mars missions use Sol's Martian solar days for operations while Earth teams work on UTC, creating a celestial version of the Gregorian Julian divide that once split Europe. The challenge isn't just technical, it's profoundly human. Do we impose Earth's 24-hour clock on other worlds, or let each planet develop its own temporal culture? Digital globalization has already stretched our timekeeping frameworks to breaking point. Cryptocurrencies operate on blockchain timestamps that ignore time zones, while virtual reality platforms create spaceless realms where night and day lose meaning. The Internet's eternal present, where news cycles refresh by the minute and birthdays trend across time zones, has birthed what chronologists call temporal homelessness. We're adrift between atomic precision and biological instinct, between the sun's rhythms and the server farm's relentless pulse. The solution might lie in layered systems, Earth's traditional calendars for cultural roots, planetary time for local conditions, and a universal net time for interstellar coordination, a temporal equivalent of speaking both a mother tongue and a lingua franca. Yet history's lesson is clear. Every calendar revolution sparks backlash. When the International Fixed Calendar proposed 13 identical months in the 1920s, religious groups revolted at the idea of Christmas always falling on a Monday. Modern attempts like the Hank Henry Permanent Calendar, with its predictable quarters and leap weeks, face similar cultural roadblocks. The Maya tracked 17 concurrent time cycles. Our challenge is honoring such diversity while preventing temporal Tower of Babel scenarios. Indigenous communities now use smartphone apps to share celestial knowledge globally, a moon phases appearing alongside Gregorian dates in digital planners, Maori Matariki alerts syncing across continents. These aren't contradictions, they're proof that pluralism can thrive in the atomic age. The deeper question isn't whether we'll adopt new systems, but who gets to decide. Silicon Valley's vision of programmable, smart calendars that auto-adjust for productivity terrifies chronobiologists who warn against divorcing time from natural light. Meanwhile, UNESCO's push to protect traditional timekeeping as intangible cultural heritage meets resistance from global corporations craving uniformity. Perhaps the answer lies in decoupling time's functions, using atomic precision for science while letting communities keep sacred rhythms, much like we use metric for measurements but still bake in cups and tablespoons. After 5,000 years of calendar wars, we're learning that harmony doesn't require hegemony. The future of time may not be a single system, but a galaxy of interconnected clocks, each keeping its own beat, yet all somehow dancing together. The lost calendar wars reveal a truth that echoes across millennia. Timekeeping is never just about counting days, it's about who gets to write the story of civilization itself. Every calendar ever imposed, from Caesar's Julian reforms to the Gregorian dates on your smartphone, carries the fingerprints of power. Behind the neat grids of months and years lie quiet revolutions, forced conversions, and the stubborn resilience of cultures refusing to let their rhythms die. These conflicts didn't just shape history, they scripted the invisible rules of modern life: when we work, how we celebrate, even how we remember. Consider the quiet dominance of the 7-day week, a Babylonian invention so deeply wired into our brains that imagining an alternative feels absurd. Yet for the French revolutionaries, its very existence was tyranny, a chains of superstition to be shattered. Or take January 1st, an arbitrary line in time drawn by Roman politicians, now treated as universal gospel. The Gregorian calendar's global spread wasn't inevitable. It was the result of empires and markets demanding synchronization, erasing local timekeepers like the Ethiopian Solomonic calendar or the Hindu Vikram Samvat as collateral damage. Yet the wars aren't over. They've just moved to new battlegrounds. When tech giants lobby to abolish leap seconds, they're replaying the same clash between precision and tradition that once divided Rome and Alexandria. The fight over daylight saving time mirrors ancient debates about who defines the workday, farmers following the sun or urbanites bound by clocks. Even our smartphones perpetuate a subtle imperialism. Notifications don't adjust for the midnight sun of Arctic communities or the siesta rhythms of Mediterranean life. What makes these conflicts so enduring is their stakes. Calendars don't just organize time, they shape collective memory. The Soviet Union didn't just change work schedules, it tried to erase the concept of Sunday as a shared pause. Colonial powers didn't just impose new dates, they severed cultures from ecological wisdom encoded in lunar planting cycles. Every reform, no matter how scientific its pretensions, carries cultural baggage. The Mayan Long Count wasn't just math, it was theology in numerical form. The Hijri calendar's lunar months aren't an error to be corrected. They're a deliberate statement that some truths transcend seasons. So the next time you scribble a date, pause. That number isn't neutral. It's the endpoint of a 1,000-year struggle between priests and programmers, emperors and revolutionaries, tradition and disruption. Your calendar is a palimpsest scraped clean and rewritten by victors, but with ghostly traces of the systems it replaced. Perhaps that's why indigenous timekeeping is resurgent today, from Maori Matariki celebrations to Navajo moon phase agriculture. In a world drowning in standardized seconds, these rhythms offer something primal, a reminder that time isn't just something we measure, it's something we live. If history teaches us anything, it's that no calendar lasts forever. The Julian system reigned for 16 centuries before its drift became untenable. The Gregorian may face its own reckoning as digital life strains against solar year thinking. Whatever comes next won't be dictated by the stars alone, but by who we are and who we want to become. The true legacy of the calendar wars isn't in the systems that survived, but in the choices they force upon us. Conformity or diversity, centralization or pluralism, the clock's tyranny or time's tapestry. Now it's your turn. If you could redesign timekeeping from scratch, would you prioritize precision or poetry? Solar symmetry or lunar lore? Hit like if you'd take a stand in these endless time wars. Subscribe to keep exploring history's hidden battlefields, and share in the comments which fallen calendar deserves a second chance. The answers might just shape the next chapter in humanity's oldest conflict, the war for